This is episode 82 of Our Modern Heritage, the Home and Family Culture podcast. I'm your host, Jody Chafee. I'm excited to share this episode with you. I had an awesome conversation with licensed marriage and family therapist, Sarri Gilman, and she has come to be a specialist in boundaries. In fact, she wrote a book called Transform Your Boundaries because she started to notice a trend in her practice that so many people were struggling with these issues that all stemmed back to their boundaries. So I had a great conversation talking with her about what boundaries are and clarifying our boundaries, how to establish our boundaries and how to reinforce them in all of our relationships and with ourselves. Thank you so much for being here and listening. I know you're going to really enjoy this episode.
I want to welcome to the show Sarri Gilman, an LMFT, and I found out that stands for Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist. And she is a psychotherapist, author, and workshop presenter. She is the author of Transform Your Boundaries and Naming and Taming Overwhelm for Healthcare and Human Service Providers. She has a private therapy counseling practice on the
Whidbey Island.
Okay.
You got it. Little Whidbey Island.
And devotes the rest of her time traveling and teaching on the subject of boundaries and overwhelm recovery, trauma, and the reflective process of soul collage. And Sarri, your humanitarian work includes founding 2 nonprofits and running nonprofits for 20 years. Her focus has been on homelessness and children and teens. And she is the founder of the Cocoon House. Her program designs became a blueprint nationally, and she received a foundation award of $1 million to create a strategy in Washington State to improve supports for children exposed to homelessness. Her strategies informed funding and programs. So she's been doing a lot of amazing work. Sarri, I love all of your work, and I'm excited to dive into this topic. And because I really value your time, when you know that somebody is so true to their boundaries, then you know that their yeses are really important. that it's calculated when you allow things into your space, into your life, that you mean it. And so it's something that I'm learning how vital boundaries are, that it allows people to, you gain self-respect and other people respect you and your boundaries as well.
Yes, I'm excited to be here today and to have this conversation with you. It's really, boundary work is so important to me, and I take any opportunity to kind of spread it to your audience and to help them get their hands around it. So hopefully our conversation today will be really worth their time.
How did you fall into this? Like, what is it that really made you fall in love with this idea of boundaries?
Well, it's one of those ideas that chased after me. I noticed it just keeps coming up, and it kept coming up for many, many years. And when you work in therapy, you start to notice patterns. And I noticed that underneath a lot of what people come to therapy for is their own struggle with what they're saying yes to and what they're saying no to. And like at the bottom of any issue going on in somebody's life, it's where is your yes and no on this? And oftentimes we're struggling with ourselves on it. It's not really our struggle with other people. It's our struggle with ourselves and not listening to our truth. So in trying to help people work on their boundaries, I realized a lot of what I learned in graduate school just simply didn't apply. Everything I learned about boundaries there was like a whole different language that psychotherapists speak, but the rest of humanity does not. And so it didn't translate. And so I had to come up with some way to help people learn these skills. And since I practice in a very small community, I could see if it was working or not, because I run into people at the grocery store and I run into them on the street, and they say to me, hey, that thing we worked on 5 years ago, that really worked. And I even in nonprofit work, in anything that involves people, you'll notice this after listening in on this conversation with me and Jody today. Almost every conversation people are having is about boundaries. And so it really kind of comes up in everything. And I thought I should share the map that I created to help people understand this better and help people strengthen their boundaries. And so that's what the book was about.
What is basically an overview of what it means to have healthy boundaries?
you all have boundaries. You all have like this compass inside of you that is your yes and your no for getting through life, but you're using it all the time. And if you're not really listening to your truth, then you're doing like people pleasing or things that you think you should do. But it's not really coming from an authentic place inside of what really matters to you. What is healthy for you might be different for somebody else. But healthy boundaries really are about listening to that compass, being true to yourself, and being honest with others around what's true for you and being willing to hear their boundaries. You know, I think of boundaries as a whole healthy picture involves also recognizing other people have boundaries and listening to what those are too. Because if you're not really listening to your own guidance system, somebody else is managing that for you. So you get kind of hijacked.
Right.
And you're just, your compass is now being managed by somebody else. So it's either you or somebody else. So you may have a really strong sense of boundaries and then lose it at some point in your life because you're using this your whole life. So this is not a you get there and now you've achieved it and now you're done and you don't have to work with it all the time. The truth is you have to work with this and pay attention all the time because you're always using this.
So you mentioned like people pleasing and things like that kind of blur our compass. So what are some other things? Where does this other ways that what is blurring our compass stem from?
That is a great question, Jody. You know, we're all raised in a family and a culture and a community, and we're taught a lot about what's expected of us. You know, we're kind of given these like social norms of how to behave and what's okay and what's not okay. And that's appropriate. You know, you need to like learn some things about what fits in your culture. And as we learn those things, we then grow up and then we have to like make decisions on our own. But along the way, we develop these patterns about how we deal with all the stuff coming at us, all the requests, all of what people want from us. And, you know, we might become sacrificers. We might become workaholics. We might become numbers, people who numb out. We might become isolators, you know, so we're not, that becomes kind of a reaction to all the things coming at us, how we're going to deal with it. And so we get stuck in those patterns. And then the patterns kind of hijack our boundaries too.
Right. Because you get stuck. Like I could see an isolator saying, well, I just say no to everything. And right. So then what? You know, I actually found myself in that kind of situation where I was like, you know, I just learned to say no to a lot of things, but then nobody comes to me anymore to ask for help. And so I was like, well, what can I do about that? You know, and learning how to overcome that obstacle too is a struggle in a way too.
Yeah, because then you start to feel lonely. Mm-hmm. You know, you isolate to protect yourself. And then you say, well, wait a minute, where is everybody? And now I'm lonely. And now my boundaries are too strong. The walls are too big because now I'm walled in by them. So in my book, I go through those 7 patterns to help people figure out which one are you using, but they're automatic, just like you said, like you knew immediately. We didn't have any prior conversation. You just knew like, oh, I'm isolated. I've used that pattern. And then we figure out how does your self-care come into balance with being an isolator? Because obviously you do need some time alone and you do need some time inward. And so how do you do self-care to take care of that part of you? And to bring balance and also get some social needs met, right? Some friends, some family time, some else of what you need.
So like, because that boundary, it's almost like taken over in a way, but I think I started out saying no as a barrier to protect myself in some way. How do we clarify when boundaries are like, when we really set true boundaries for ourselves or when they are things that we just react to kind of protect ourselves?
I think when people start out in boundary work, they start out often, you know, with, I'm just going to say no to everything. You know, I did that too. At one point I made these little no cards. They all said no on them. I just wrote them on little pieces of paper and stuck them in my pockets and put them on my computer and on my phone to remember to say no more often. So I think we start out when we're really working on our boundaries with trying to strengthen our no. But once you get into becoming like a boundaries expert, once you get into really doing the work in your life on boundaries and really thinking about it and paying attention and noticing where you need them and where you can soften them up, you start to become kind of an expert in your life. And you start realizing that yes is very important as well. Where you say yes is also part of your boundaries. Boundaries is not just the word no. And it's about our relationships to our closest people, to our work, to our loved ones. It's, where are we saying yes? Where are we saying no? And yes becomes just as important too.
When you do boundary work with people, how much of it really involves just sitting down with them to unpack their core values, figuring out what their true values are? How important is that?
That's very important, but that's not really where we start. It's an interesting idea because starting there, that's like deeper hard work, for people to get to. I like to start with self-care. Is how are you taking care of yourself? Oftentimes, if you haven't been using your boundaries in a way that works for you, you don't have any time for self-care and you don't even know what it looks like and you're not even sure what it is. So getting down to values is like, I want to wait until I know that you have self-care in place because I want that to show up in your values. And if I just dig into people around, let's talk about what's most important to you, self-care is often not going to show up on the list if they haven't been doing it. And you're going to need that because if we're going to do boundary work, your boundaries have only one job, and that is to take care of you. And that may not be on your list of values. So I want to wait, do that work first before getting to values work because I want that to be part of it.
Yeah. Because that's what I was listening to your TED Talk and I was just like, what comes first then? Is it your compass, your yes, no compass, or is it your values? And that makes sense to me that if you aren't putting yourself first, then you don't even know what your values are. and so, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And just some basic self-care, some self-nurturance, doing things that make you happy, doing things that just feed your soul. And when you feel like you have more self-care going, then I want to look at what's really important to you to help figure out kind of where do you want your boundaries to be. And oftentimes, in therapy, people can say things to me that maybe they won't say out loud outside of therapy. And therapy becomes a place where you can first say your truths, because the next step is really becoming authentic in your relationships. And people might not know where your boundaries are because you haven't been sharing that you have to speak up for them and that something is crossing the line for you. And when you haven't been authentic to people around you, they don't know where your boundaries are. So we have to work on authenticity and being able to speak your truth, whatever your truth is.
So I think of self-care a lot of times is like recovery, taking the time to say, I've done so much.
Great definition of it.
I need to take a break. So what advice would you have for parents who feel like their responsibility is always to sacrifice for their children?
I'm laughing because my kids are grown and older, and God, they would hate that definition if they heard that. My kids would be upset if they thought that's how I defined parenting, as just sacrificing. I think of parenting as modeling. This is what a grown-up looks like. You're going to be one day. What kind of grown-up are you going to be? And my job is not to just sacrifice for you. My job is to give you a model of what a healthy adult looks like and support you to discover your gifts, your talents, your abilities, and help you get strong in those. And also give you some of the tools that you're going to need to be successful in your life, to be able to handle what I consider are going to be big life challenges. And if I'm doing my job as a parent, I'm sending you out into the world able to handle some of what's going to come rolling down the hill at you. And that when things get tough, you're going to know how to stand up. And that to me is great parenting and prepares kids to become adults and to be responsible and to be able to take care of themselves and to take care of whatever they decide to take on as their responsibilities. It is definitely not just to sacrifice for them, although I think that is widespread in our culture, Jody, that idea of just sacrifice for your kids. And then they wonder when their kids become teenagers why they don't have good boundaries. Because by the time you get to adolescence, you're starting to really practice boundaries and often failing wildly at that. But that's okay, because, that's like the beginning of learning them, right? Of starting to use them in your own decision making. And, parents are just wild about some of the stuff their kids are doing. Well, if all you've shown them really is sacrificing, you haven't really prepared them to get to use their boundaries because you haven't been modeling that you have boundaries when you're with them.
Yeah.
So boundaries are really important in parenting. Go ahead.
Well, I heard somebody tell a story about their boundaries, that no means no until somebody gets upset, and then you give into them. That's blurring your boundaries and things, that if you need to be able to, like going back to this people-pleasing idea, that when we're true to our boundaries, then people respect that no. And you hold to it. And because I'm thinking of, as a parent, that we say no to our children and they kick and scream and throw a fit about it. We go, okay, just be quiet, then they'll believe that no only means no, as long as the other person approves or is happy. And growing up with that mentality, that belief, that blurs over into other aspects of their life. As a parent, helping them understand how to say no and also accepting no as an answer for themselves would be
really important. And that's exactly how it works. Because what you're teaching them, when you say no and then they throw a fit and then you say no again, the fit gets bigger and then you give in, what you're really teaching them is to be emotional manipulators. And you're teaching them to do that to get what they want in the world. And so when they become adults, in order to get what they want, they're not sure how to go about that, because you don't get a job by throwing a fit at somebody, right? And so that's one of the areas where they're not going to be really prepared for adulthood, because emotional manipulation is going to be very destructive to your closest relationships. It's going to make it hard to get the things you want in life, because that's not how life works. So as parents, you don't want to teach that to children, because that's not how the world works. The world is not going to be your mommy. So we have to think beyond what I'm doing in this moment with a small child and think, what does that look like when you're a grown up?
Maybe this is a pivot a little bit. What is the difference though between like when you're tolerating a breakdown in your boundaries versus grit? Like if I'm saying, like somebody comes to me and say, I know you're busy, but I need you to give up your boundary in this particular area because I need you or something. Then people might say, well, just grit through. How do you explain like when things are violating your boundaries versus something you just need to grit through and say? So it's like when we say to our kids, you need to do your homework, and they say, that's more than I can handle right now. And you say, well, you need to just strengthen your self-discipline.
So these are habits, what you're describing, right? And how we get into these habits with people around us. And so the homework example is you're helping a kid develop good, healthy work ethic habits, homework habits, and take on your responsibility, manage those first, and then you can go do anything else. And you're just teaching habits. In your relationship, like right now in my house, my husband is really working on increasing his self-care. We've just been through a lot. I had broken my hip, and so I needed a lot of extra care from him. And he works full time, and we were building something. So he's been like busier and busier and busier. And now that I'm getting well and I can walk on my own and do things, he is focusing on his self-care. And I noticed like some extra things that I can do to support him and kind of free him up, to give him more time for self-care. And now is not the time for me to say to him, oh, can I get your help with, can you blah, blah, blah? Because I know he's really been maxed out. He's focusing on doing some things that just feed his soul. And I want to make sure to give him that space. And so it is kind of this process where you may decide on something for a boundary, And then like he's decided that's his boundary, but it would be very easy for him to give in and say, oh, but you need help with this one thing. I can give up kayaking today and go help you with that. He's just that kind of a person. Mm-hmm. And so I'm being careful not to push on that or ask on that. But people, you're going to set up a boundary. You're going to say, I can't help with that PTA thing, or I'm maxed out on volunteering. And then people are going to say, oh my gosh, but I so need you for this one thing. And you have to think about at that moment, what's my commitment to myself? Mm-hmm. What's my promise to myself? And am I upholding my commitments to me right now? Or am I just filling up with what everybody else needs from me? And so even when it looks like I've made a commitment to myself, I take that very, very seriously, because then my soul is watching me break all my promises to myself. And then I lose trust with my compass, and my compass no longer trusts me to tell me the truth. And I can't even hear what my truth is, because it's like, why should I bother telling you? You never listen. I tell you no, and then you say yes. And so why are we even doing this? It can be hard to tune into your compass because you've broken trust with yourself over and over again, and it becomes a habit. So you have to look at that and go, is this an exception? Is this important to me to go help with this? Or is this breaking a promise to myself, and I'm needed to be with me and to do the thing that I promised myself I would do with my time?
So basically what you're saying, I think, is that you need to get clear on your why. Every time somebody approaches you, mm-hmm. say why would I do that? Or why wouldn't I do that? What's true to me? And the other thing that I heard you saying with your husband, and how he kind of made a sacrifice to take care of you in a way, mm-hmm. and then to recover from that by reestablishing the boundaries mm-hmm. after, you've completed this task, and saying, okay, now that responsibility is fulfilled, I need to recover my boundaries and take some time for myself, get back to the basics.
That's right. That's right. Because it's all about, it all starts creating habits. And so is the habit that he's always supposed to be taking care of me now? No, not like that. Not waiting on me hand and foot. And getting back to what our habit is, mm-hmm. which is, listen to your truth and make time for what you need.
No, I appreciate that. I think that sometimes in relationships, we kind of start to feel like entitled almost to when somebody starts doing certain things like those habits, and to be able to sit down with your partner, in a relationship, whatever the relationship is, and reestablish what really works and what's not working. That would be a challenge, right?
Yeah, I think couples should do that like every 3 months, that they should sit down with each other and say, do I feel like things are fair on the inside? Like, no, or am I starting to get resentful about I'm doing so much and you're not here doing it with me? Whatever the issue is, or I'm contributing so much more financially and I need more help. But for couples to stay checked in with each other, I think they have to have is this fair conversation like every 3 months, so they can readjust and say, oh, we've gotten out of balance. This is really unfair. And I can see why it feels unfair for you. Children demanding. Yeah. It takes a lot of energy. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I like this advice, because I think in our, modern culture, our roles as families it's not always like a traditional family setting. And I think even then, you still have to sit down and say, look, it's fair. But you know what I mean? I think that there's so much where I think if you don't clarify those roles together, there might be a family where somebody grew up in a traditional family where dad goes to work, mom goes to home care or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily work all the time, and so, right. Or the other might have been raised in a less traditional where both worked or dad stayed home, and that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that at all. It's just to be able to come together and clarify where your roles are. And I like this advice to check in regularly and say, is this fair? Or check in regularly when if dad is hating his job and mom's going, right. Okay, what can I do? And that happened to us.
Did it? Yeah.
Yes. my husband hated his job, and it was really wearing on all of us. And he quit his job because it was just not serving his family. And, you know, we're coming together to regularly check in all the time and say, what are we doing here? You know, to make sure that what we are doing, the roles that we're fulfilling, it's not just making a paycheck was important, but it wasn't as important as our well-being. And so we needed to find a different route to serve our family in that capacity. So we came together, we sat down and agreed on what needed to happen going forward to be happy. So that's
really important. What a powerful story, Jody. And, you know, it must have been really scary to also both of you kind of come to that truth and decide that, you know, though it was scary and there were unknowns, that the two of you decided you were going to walk through the unknown rather than stick with what you knew, because what you knew was not making him happy.
Well, that's this whole message around family culture. I just think that we need to be able to question the status quo sometimes. We need to be able to go, is this really what's serving our family? Is this really coming back to what we truly believe and our values? And, you know, this idea of taking care of ourselves and recovering is what we normally do, or the customs that we grew up with. Do they really serve us? And I like something that you said in your TED Talk, that establishing your boundaries, you have to tolerate stormy emotions and a little bit of sweat.
Yeah.
And I loved that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, what that means to tolerate stormy emotions?
It kind of relates to what we were talking about in families too, and with little kids, and with, you know, how you prepare people for adulthood. And is that, you know, we all go through kind of emotional challenges, and they can be really hard on us, and our feelings can make us feel like we're just in a tornado storm of emotions. And your boundaries are really different than your emotional system. So you can't let these stormy emotions kind of guide all your decision making. It's the wrong instrument to guide you. But you have to know how to take care of your feelings. So you have these feelings, and rather than be afraid by how overwhelming it is and how scary things might feel and how large your feelings might be, to not get kind of swept away that'll make all your decisions, but to just notice those and to figure out, how can I take care of myself? I'm feeling so scared. Like, we've made this major decision. You're going to leave your job, and now I'm in a panic, but I'm going to take care of that feeling. Like, I don't want you to now, because I'm panicked, turn it back around and go back to that terrible job that you weren't happy at. It just means I'm in a panic. I just need to get through my fear, and I need to do some things to help myself feel calmer and less afraid. So it's about kind of working with these emotions and being able to tolerate them and tolerate the stress, rather than saying, okay, I'm really scared. You need to go back to that crappy job. That's often what people do, is they get a feeling and they want everybody to react differently because they feel something, rather than, no, you're going to get these horrible stormy feelings, and they scare you and they overwhelm you and they exhaust you, but you get through them. They're just part of being human, and you learn how to take care of yourself emotionally. And how to soothe yourself and figure out what helps me when I'm feeling this upset or this afraid. What helps me? It doesn't, making you do something else is not going to help me. I need to learn how to deal with my fear.
Well, and I think that speaks to, anytime that if you're clear on your boundaries, then you say no to things, then those people go, okay, well then I figured this out myself. You know what I mean? Like, people get creative when you set limit, and that's really how it's become for us. Like, we set this limit that's just not an option, and so we have gotten creative in other ways and finding meaning in this path that we've chosen, rather than just always avoiding pain.
And what a model for children to see growing up! Oh my gosh. What a model. Like, can I just give you like 15 gold stars? What a model for kids to see, to say, okay, we're uncomfortable. It's hard, but we've chosen this and we will get through this. And we will, these are the things that, are on this path too. This is part of this path.
I appreciate this for, everybody listening to this, going, okay, what am I tolerating as far as things, because there's a difference between tolerating the crappy boundaries and tolerating those emotions.
Right. And so, being in touch with your truth and knowing that, you're going through difficult emotions because you are standing by your boundaries, not because you've abandoned them and now you're resentful and overwhelmed.
So what are some strategies for people who want to clarify their boundaries and know that there's going to be some stirring emotions from other people? What can they say? What are things that maybe some dialogue that people can make it easier?
So when somebody is upset with me, what helps me is to picture them in a really large balloon and that they're just letting all the air out of their balloon when they're expressing their anger. And I just kind of wait and let the air go out. Like, okay, they're going to say all this until they're done. And I'm still not going to change my boundary. I don't need to tell them that while they're upset. And I have a little thing that I say to myself over and over in my head, which is taking care of their feelings is their job. I have to take care of my feelings. I can't take care of your feelings. And I am a therapist, people. I am a psychotherapist. And I don't take care of people's feelings. I teach people how to take care of their own feelings. That's my job. I can't possibly take care of everybody's feelings emotionally. That doesn't make any sense. I do the same if somebody is upset with me out in my life in some way is, I just recognize that they're upset. They're having a hard day. And sometimes I'll say like, I hope you feel better soon. Or, I can see this is hard for you. Acknowledge their feelings. But I don't take them on or change what I'm saying yes or no to based on that. I let them have their feelings. I know this is really hard for you and really difficult. And I see that you're struggling. Period. Full stop. I witness. I see that you're struggling. And the same is true with kids. They will get through it. They're their feelings. You're not there to kind of mop up all their feelings or fix everything for them. That's, again, not preparing them for real life. You can be by their side. You can listen. They have to learn how to cope with their feelings because they're going to be living with feelings their whole life.
We can hold them and we can comfort them.
That was a hard thing that happened.
No answers. Yeah.
That was really, really hard. And I like the way you're handling this. And you're just you're just feeling your feelings. And that's what we need to do is we just feel them. Our feelings just want to be understood, period. So we just understand them and we feel them. And they lift up and let go of us when they're ready.
So what about when people are invading our boundaries? What do we do to clarify our boundaries when people are encroaching into our?
You're asking the $1 million question. I bet every listener wants to know this. What do you do when people are invading your boundary? You make your boundary more clear. The people that are boundary invaders, boundary challengers, they grew up learning to manipulate people. They grew up learning that in order to get what I want, I just keep pushing and pushing and pushing you. And then you give in. That's exactly what they learned. So those boundary pushers, they may be boundary blind. They may not even, they just trample over your boundary. And so what's hard for people is you have to make it match the level at which they're invading you. So if somebody is like trampling over my boundaries, I have to make them really clear and firm. And I have to say them very firmly to somebody. Maybe I would never set a boundary like that to somebody else. But if I'm dealing with a boundary challenger, an invader, I have to set them very, very firmly so they understand I'm not budging. This is non-negotiable. Let me make this clearer for you because you're not seeing it. So I'll make it more clear. I use that kind of tone of voice, that seriousness, and people get, oh, she means that. I've made my boundary more clear. And so, if you're around boundary invaders, particularly at work, a lot of people find that so uncomfortable. They'd rather leave their job than try to deal with somebody that pushes and pushes, particularly if it's a boss. It just becomes too hard to manage them. But in your life, somebody might have a mom that's a boundary invader or something else. And, you need to be really, really clear with people and not worry that you're sounding mean, because you can sound very mean, but it's the only way they hear it. So you have to be kind of firmer and meaner and tougher than you normally feel like being.
Well, I heard this story once where it was like, if somebody was invading your boundaries, just say for an example, my child keeps stepping on my foot and they think it's funny or something. And I'll just be like, that's not okay with me. And if you don't stop doing that, I'm going to leave the room or something like that. So it's not that because I felt like this one time my son, he did something. He threw a rock and it hit our daughter. They were outside. And initially I was like, okay, now you need to pay the consequence. You need to do a chore in our house. And he was so upset. He was more upset that he didn't get to go back outside than he was about having to do a chore. Like, he just ignored the chore and just threw a fit the whole time. And I was like, it would have been enough to just clarify this. You violated your sister's boundary. You hurt her. So you can't go be outside by her right now. And that was enough for him. Mm-hmm. To stack a punishment on top of that, the punishment didn't fit the crime, to just say, you crossed the line. Now that barrier is, I'm going to reinforce it. Mm-hmm. That was enough.
Now you're not ready to be outside because you were being outside on your own. I thought you could handle that responsibility. So now you're not outside, you're inside. And we'll try again tomorrow and see if you can manage the boundaries that involve being outside, outside on your own with your sister. I definitely thought you were ready for that. I definitely thought you were more responsible. And I'm willing to try again with you tomorrow and see if you are that responsible. But they're learning. And I think that's great for you to realize that is that, when you're doing it with kids, they're learning, you're learning. It's not going to come out perfect. As parents, I think we do run those errors of sort of, I can think of a million times where I've set a boundary with my kids when we were growing up that might have been too much. It was not, it didn't fit the thing. And then you have to back down and say, I really want to change that. I think I was upset. And I think in the moment, my stormy emotion, I set that boundary a little firmer than I really needed it to be. Let's see if you understand what I'm talking about.
When somebody, those boundary violators, to stay clear about those boundaries, because it was it was too much to try to force something on my son, but just to reinforce those boundaries. It's clarified was enough.
Mm-hmm. And you can use that as a new teaching tool, right? That you can have those kinds of discussions. Where's the boundary? Why am I so upset with him right now? Because I think you just described it, as parents, we get emotionally upset when something happens where our kids are violating somebody's boundaries. And we step in and we're still pretty emotional about it. And it helps to kind of say, I'm going to talk with you about this. I need a half hour. I need a half hour. And then we're going to talk about what happened because I need to calm down. And right now is not a good moment for me to set a boundary with you. But I'll let you know what the boundary is when I feel calmer. Right now, you can guess for the next 30 minutes where the boundary is. Let's see if you come up with anything.
No, we were able to apologize to him and clarify what our expectations were.
And those are great conversations to have inside of a family too, because they're learning with us.
What is the difference between boundaries and judgment? Because I think that we need to discern where our boundaries are. But I think sometimes I wonder if judgment clouds our boundaries.
This is what we struggle with in the world is it's about, our judgment. Is that right for other people? We have to be careful that we're leaving room for other people to decide their own boundary and what's okay for them. And then what becomes violating to all of us. If we look at some of our environmental issues, a company may be exercising really poor judgment and then suddenly all the water in your town is poisoned and it affects everyone. And you have to drink this and you don't have another water source. Their lack of judgment, of good judgment, has now violated you. And so how do we resolve things like this? And so we have to really be looking at, well, if they're going to make a decision that's going to affect everybody's water, they better find out, kind of where people are with this and what kind of water you expect and what's right for your boundaries and safe and healthy for your family. And so we haven't done that. So that's kind of a level of boundary work that I hope one day people on our planet get to. I mean, that's why I do this work, really, Jody, is this is the heart of it, is we have a real problem with judgment, how we judge others, our sense of judgment, whether or not we're asking people for their input and realizing that maybe we're establishing boundaries that are going to affect people in a harmful way. This is something that is kind of the next level of growth for humanity. So I appreciate that you just brought that up.
It's something that I've been thinking a lot about. I think that we need to have a lot more patience and tolerance and understanding and love for people in general. and for ourselves, I think that sometimes we create these, like I was saying in the beginning, I think that we try to protect ourselves from things, but not realizing or wanting to understand what's going on there, what's really happening. And so we just set up a barrier and just shut it out. I don't want to know. I don't understand. So just shut it out. To really have a true barrier is I think to understand and to have that clarity of like, where is my yes and my no? And is it real? Like, is this something that I just made up because I don't understand? Or is it something I sought to understand? And now here's where I know I can draw my line.
And is my line for me or is it for you?
And then say, if that's not your line, that's okay. That's your line. You understand, or you have more tolerance or certain things or whatever. And that's fine. This idea that our values and judgment, that it really ought to always come back to that we value the relationship, keeping true to what understanding and truth.
That is a beautiful way to summarize that, Jody.
Thank you so much for being here. Your book is called
Transform Your Boundaries.
Transform Your Boundaries.
Yes, and you can get it in independent bookstores or on Amazon.
Awesome. And where can we find you online?
You can find me on my website, and I also have an online school that has some classes on boundaries. That is sarrigilman.com, SarriGilman.com. And awesome. You can also reach me there. So look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarri.
Thanks for having me, Jody.
Thank you so much for listening. I realized after my interview with Sarri that I'd forgotten to plug in my fancy microphone. So thank you for tolerating this sound from my AirPods. Sarri had so many amazing tips and resources and ideas on how we can establish and firm up our boundaries and why it's so important. I'm so grateful for the things that she shared. I want you to join me on Friday after listening to this podcast, this episode. I will be hosting live strategy calls to talk about the importance of the principles and ideas that I discuss on my podcast. You can opt in for these calls by going to homeandfamilyculture.com, and you'll see a button there where you can put in your information, and I will send you the link to join me in those calls, because I want to hear from you and I want to meet you and I want to be able to talk about these things and help you to clarify what these things mean and how you can practice them in your family culture, because these are strategies for success and for navigating your family culture. So I want to be here for you. I want to talk with you about these things. You can come find me also on Instagram at Family Culture Podcast. And I would be so thankful if you go onto iTunes and leave a rating and a review and share with your friends and family. Thank you so much for listening. Mother Teresa once said that if you want to change the world, go home and love your family.